Is it just me, or is that countdown going on forever? What happened there? Did I hit the wrong one? Is there
Yeah, you did. It's okay.
Interesting.
We had one that just kind of repeated for halftime of the game.
Waiting for the final beat, and I'm like, why is this thing still going?
I know. I was thinking the same thing. I was typing to another friend of mine, and I'm thinking to myself, it's got to be about over. Nope. It's all good.
Well, here we are. He's Vince. I'm Sean. It's Monday. What a day outside, huh?
My gosh. I mean, you talk about, so I got door duty every morning at 8 o'clock, and I got the winter coat on, doing, the whole deal. It was about 30-something degrees this morning. And I go out for bus duty at 3:17, 3:20. It's like the sun is out. It's 64 degrees. It's like we don't play baseball in that nice of weather the entire spring. The entire spring. And
that's
February,
what sucks is, it's going to, tomorrow is supposed to be pretty bad, I guess. And then, I mean, we're probably going to get snow one more time. So,
of course. And it'll probably be right around the first week of the baseball season.
Right.
The high school baseball season. So, yeah, it's coming, and there will be games canceled and moved and everything else. But today, man, holy cow, it's 64 and sunny.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's unbelievable.
It is. It is. Well, we bring you a topic today that feels relevant. See what I did there?
I did.
Seems relevant for the time anyway, with all this talk going on. How secure is Notre Dame's football independence? And DK was in here early, and I'm only going to use one of these. DK, he put up about 5 different options for me to choose from. He said more secure than the average marriage. I thought that was
that's fair.
Yeah, I thought that
and a little sad all at the same time.
Yeah, that's right.
Just gonna say.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We do have, of course, in rapid fire a little bit later, a lot more topics as well. But I bring this up after all the talk last week about Notre Dame's place in the college football playoff, never getting a first round bye. And then, the segue into, Notre Dame is irrelevant and all that stuff that popped up as well that we talked about. So I guess after all of that, after hearing all of that last week, Vince, and just sort of the general landscape of where college football is right now, are you any more concerned about Notre Dame and its ability to stay independent going forward?
I would say that as we sit here on February 26, 2024, with the new 12-team playoff, coming forward, and we've got the new, it's the 7-5, right? 7 at-large, 5 conference champions. I don't think Notre Dame's independence has been more secure in a long time than it is right now. I really do feel that way. And it has a lot to do. I've always said this, right? And I think you've always said this as well, because you and I have had this conversation since, basically we met, because everybody
basically since the beginning of time.
Yeah. I mean, everybody talks about Notre Dame's independence, and it's like, if you're not a Notre Dame fan, you hate it. And if you are a Notre Dame fan, you love it. And there's no in between. Right. And we've always said it's 2 things.
I mean, that's basically where the line is drawn.
Yeah.
With, people screaming about Notre Dame needs to be independent versus Notre Dame, we're going to stay independent. I mean, that's where the line is drawn. You're on 100%. One side or the other, basically.
And it always comes down to 2 questions. And if you can answer these questions positively for Notre Dame, then you stay independent. This is how I feel, and I think you feel the same way. Number 1, access to a national championship. And in this case, access to the playoff.
Right.
Do you have it? Yes or no? It's simple. Yes or no? They do. So that's one question.
Playoff field's expanding. They have access to it.
Right. Number 2, TV deal. Do you have a home for your games on the television? And we all know that Notre Dame was really the first one to do it with the NBC contract way back when they had it. And now they've continued, obviously, that relationship with NBC, whether fans like it or not. But I will say NBC is moving in the right direction with a lot of things. But do they have that? Yes or no? The answer is yes. And so you can answer yes to both of those questions. Then Notre Dame is secure. They're fine. There is absolutely zero reason for them to join a conference right now. They have access and they have a TV deal. They're good.
Okay, Vince. Are you ready for rapid fire? No.
That's quick.
Vince answered the question. We'll just get out of here with that.
And obviously we're going to dive more into it and we're going to talk about different, bits and pieces of it. But
right.
Isn't that really what it comes down to? I mean,
no, and that's again, it's like this sort of general overall clamor, around Notre Dame. Oh, Notre Dame's they're getting the shaft on this deal, and
right.
Like this college football playoff format, regardless of the sky is falling, and everyone from the outside, like you said, wants to tell you. It has zero effect on whether or not Notre Dame is going to remain independent. And I continue to be shocked by how many people in the media around the country just continue to show their ignorance on this subject. And I'm talking specifically, again, about the college football playoff format. This is not forcing Notre Dame's hand because, again, so many people think that somehow Notre Dame is getting the shaft in this deal, by not getting a bye when the playoff format expands next year. When, as you just said, as we've talked about, Jack Swarbrick, the athletic director, and I want you to listen to the titles that I use. Jack Swarbrick, the athletic director at Notre Dame, sat in the room with conference commissioners and helped craft this format. Think about that. The people who came up with the format are a bunch of conference commissioners and one school's athletic director. Think about that when you think about who wields the power in college football.
And who's relevant
in
and
the
who's
country.
irrelevant.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. So from Greg Sankey in the SEC standpoint, this is as much a concession to Notre Dame as it is Notre Dame's concession for being in the playoff and accepting the fact that they can't have that bye. So again, it's like we talked about this. I think people who follow Notre Dame football understand this because I think, as you brought up first thing last week, like the whole Notre Dame's not getting a bye. This is not new. I mean, it's almost 3 years old at this point. But Greg Sankey knows that if Notre Dame is ever forced into a conference, it's not going to be the SEC because it's Notre Dame and those schools are just not a match.
Good call.
But in a lot of different ways, from the footprint to when you start looking at academics and just the whole thing. Notre Dame's going to either be in the ACC or the Big Ten. If they're ever forced into a conference. More likely it's looking like the Big Ten at some point, but the ACC is still out there. And like when you talk about TV deals and stuff like that, if Notre Dame were to be attached full-fledged to the ACC, that TV contract is going to get redone because it would be worth a lot more money with Notre Dame attached full-fledged, even than what it is, than what it's worth right now. But, like I was just out in North Carolina last week with women's basketball and talking to a Duke guy, nice enough guy, seems smart enough and all that kind of stuff. But, we're just talking about some things. He's like, oh, Notre Dame could be in the Big Ten in the next 5 years, and it's like, it's just everyone seems to have that opinion. Like it is just eminent that Notre Dame is, because all these things that are quote unquote, working against Notre Dame is just going to force Notre Dame into a conference imminently.
I just don't understand it. I don't explain to me why they're going to be forced in. Like, why are they going to be taken? Is there access to the national championship going to be taken away? Are they changing the format that's going to exclude Notre Dame? Is that happening? Not the last time I checked.
Right.
And they just signed a brand new deal with NBC, so that's not going away either. So,
right. But now remember that it's only a 5-year extension, which is interesting because the previous extensions have all been
for NBC,
a little bit longer than 5 years. So it's almost like NBC
which I get that.
is sort of playing a little. Okay, well we'll re-up right now. We'll give you more money, but we're going to kind of wait and see, just in terms of maybe what things look like another 5 years from now.
And I actually have.
If things stay the way they are right now, I see another 5-year deal added on right after that.
And I don't really have a problem with that from the side of NBC. And frankly, I think that benefits Notre Dame too, because of how rapidly we have seen the college football landscape change in the last 5 years, right? So if we're projecting forward to another 5, who knows what changes are going to come? And so I think being able to come back to the table for both parties is actually beneficial at 5 years as opposed to 10 years, because God only knows what it's going to be like 10 years from now, right? So
right.
I actually have no problem with it being probably half the length that it's been in the past, because of how quickly things have changed. And with how quickly conference alignments have adjusted and changed and everything else. And 5 years is fine by me. I really don't have a problem with that part.
But you're absolutely right. As long as they keep the TV contract, as long as they have the access to the college football playoff, and they've got both.
Yeah.
That's it right there. People on the outside, people who are like anti Notre Dame, like that's where it all comes from.
Yeah.
Right there. And again, for people who aren't Notre Dame people, any school who had those two things would jump on that themselves. They would be independent if they had those two things, they would do it themselves as well. I have no doubt about it. Like if Penn State had that opportunity 3 decades ago to get that, to have their own TV, obviously there wasn't a playoff at that point, but if they had the opportunity to get their own TV deal and have, like, the path to the playoff is where it's become right now, because obviously what constitutes being able to play for national championships has changed quite a bit over the last 30 years. But where we are right now, if Penn State had that opportunity, they would jump on it.
Oh, if any school, Florida State, Penn State, Georgia, Alabama, you name it, if they could sustain independence the way Notre Dame has, get their own TV deal, if they could do it, they would do it. They would 100% do it, but they can't. And that's the difference. And then you want to talk about who's relevant and who's not. I mean, come on. Independence versus conference play. Like, who's relevant? Notre Dame's relevant, okay? And, there's obviously many boxes you can check from the relevance and from the independent standpoint. But if you can sustain independence, you are automatically relevant because of that.
Yes, absolutely.
And I like what you said, by the way. We can kind of dig into this a little bit if you want to, about Greg Sankey and the SEC and all that. They're more than willing to give Notre Dame what they want, because they don't want Notre Dame to be in a conference. Because
it's basically playing defense. That's
absolutely, 100%.
Yes.
He doesn't want Notre Dame in the Big Ten. He doesn't want Notre Dame in the ACC. And he knows Notre Dame's not going to the SEC. So he's going to bend over backwards for Notre Dame to make sure that they get what they want, so that they remain independent and not, harming his conference. Because if he goes to the Big Ten, it's over. Like, the Big Ten is now more powerful. I just hit a picture almost off my wall. The Big Ten is now more powerful than the SEC, period, end of discussion. And Greg Sankey doesn't want that.
Soviet Union and the United States were not, they didn't ally in World War II because they loved each other, right? They allied because they had a common enemy. Same, but it's, again, it's like you're playing defense, you're bonding together Not that
Right.
not that the Big Ten is an enemy, but Notre Dame wants to stay independent, and Greg Sankey knows that it's in his best interest to help Notre Dame out a little bit because he doesn't want Notre Dame jumping into the Big Ten. Because again, it's like it's a TV war,
Yeah. Oh,
that's going
yeah.
on as much as anything,
100%.
right? And like the game of musical chairs, and that's kind of the thing, like that is sort of what keeps Notre Dame propped up because it is a game of musical chairs with everybody shifting and all this money flowing in different directions
Absolutely.
out there. What's going to keep Notre Dame propped up? Obviously, the two things that you talked about, the
Mm-hmm.
access to the college football playoff, and that's where Greg Sankey has an active hand in
Oh,
helping
yeah.
out Notre Dame. And again, playing defense,
Mm-hmm.
keeping them away from the Big Ten.
Absolutely. Because I don't think Notre Dame going to the ACC hurts the SEC. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see that as being super painful towards the SEC, but going to the Big Ten is absolutely what he does not want.
Right.
In no way, shape, or form does he want that. And so he's going to do everything he can to prevent that from happening. I think, the ACC is still tenuous as far as its future and its sustainability and all of that. And Notre Dame sees it, and they're trying to help the ACC. They're doing the best that they can. They're, bringing in Stanford and Cal, and they're trying to help sustain it. It's going to be very interesting to see which direction the ACC goes, or if we're basically in line for a Power 2 at some point.
Right. And obviously, if it does keep going in that direction, then that would definitely change the hand that Notre Dame
Oh,
has to
sure.
play if things keep going in that direction. But as you said, as we stand right now,
Right.
things are
Strong.
still in place. Yeah.
Right. And it's strong. It's strong footing for Notre Dame where they are right now. Very strong. And people that get bent out of shape about not being a 1, 2, 3, or 4 seed, that's just not, at the end of the day, that's just not that big of a deal. And here's the other thing that I think people forget. Just because let's grant the premise that at the end of the season, Notre Dame is the number 1 team in the country. Let's just grant that premise.
Okay.
And so people are upset that they then have to drop to 5.
Right.
Well, are you going to be equally as upset if, say, the Big 12 champion who gets a first round bye and gets to be one of the top 4 seeds is ranked like 14th, and now all of a sudden they're 4th? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
those aren't going to be the
Well,
legitimate 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's going to be some teams that aren't supposed to be ranked that high, but they have to be up that high because they're a conference champ.
right. And look, the other side of this is if I'm like if you were the SEC or a Big Ten team, would you trade playing in a conference championship game for being in the position that Notre Dame is, which is you are in the playoff, but you're never playing in a conference championship game, and you also never get the first round bye, which you talked about? Because let me pose it to you theoretically like this. Because let's say Georgia
There you
plays
go.
Alabama in
Knew
the
it.
SEC championship game,
Yep.
and they're 1-2 in the nation, right?
Mhm.
Going into that game, they're both theoretically in the running to be a top 4, like to get
Yeah.
a bye because
Right.
they're 1-2, they're ranked 1-2 in the country. So they're both in line to get a bye, but they have to play that game,
Right.
right? And guess what? The loser of that game is not going to get a first round bye, but they still have to play that game. So now they've played that 13th game, and then they see where they fall when the actual seeds come out. And when that happens, they've got to play their 14th game in the first round of the playoff, right? Well, Notre Dame is only playing its 13th game in the first round of the
Exactly.
playoff.
Yep.
So 1 versus 2 in a conference championship game. Loser basically gets bounced at. The winner is going to be the number 1 seed in the country. The loser is going to bounce out and have to play that first round game. They'll still get a home playoff game, but they're going to
Sure.
have to play that first round game. So they're playing their 14th game when Notre Dame was playing its 13th game.
Right.
Doesn't that seem like a pretty good trade-off in Notre Dame's favor in that case?
Absolutely. Look, it's real simple. Ask Georgia fans from 2023 if they would have rather not played in a conference championship game or you know what I mean? Because they still would have been undefeated. Like, no, we're good. We don't need to play in a conference championship game. We're undefeated. We're the number one team in the country. You know what I mean? And they would have been very happy with that, I would think, because they lost and then they got bounced, right? They ended up being, I think, the number 6 team in the country after they lost that game. I mean, they fell like a rock after that game.
Well, look, in the not so secret of these conference championship games is they are far less important than the TV networks and the conferences themselves want you to believe, right? Absolutely. Like this whole thing started because the SEC, the popularity of the SEC championship game that they started, in the early to mid 90s, I guess. Literally the only reason that they even continue to have these games now at this point is because they're on TV and they're getting TV revenue out of the whole thing. And they make they make some money, obviously, selling at the stadium as well, but the big money is made from the TV contract. It's literally a TV show. They're putting them on TV. It's like, what would you rather watch in the first weekend of December anyway? Would you rather watch basketball or would you rather watch some conference championship games? That's literally the reason they have them. I'll be curious to see, again, as the playoff expands, and we saw last week that the SEC and the Big Ten were already pushing for an even more expanded playoff so they could get even more of their teams into the playoff. I think the only way that that's going to come about ultimately is if they say, let's do away with the conference championship games, because there really literally is no reason to have them. You don't need them anymore with a 12-team format and beyond.
Well, and to be honest with you, you could still do, because somebody said, okay, well, if you don't do the conference championship, that if you don't do the conference championship games, you've got to expand to 16 so nobody gets a bye. You could still do a bye for the top 4 teams. They're just not conference champions. It would be the legitimate top 4 teams. Because look, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that going into this 12-team playoff format for however long they have the 12-team playoff format, it's never going to be cut and dry the actual top 4 teams getting the top 4 seeds. It's never going to happen, because there's going to be either upsets in the conference championship game, or Notre Dame should have been 1 through 4, or something along those lines is going to make it so that it's not a legitimate 1 through 4. It's never going to happen. But if you got rid of the whole conference championship games and you actually had the legitimate 1 through 4 that they get a bye, that makes more sense to me. Do you follow along with what I'm saying? It's never going to be the actual 1 through 4 getting those 1 through 4 seeds. I just don't think so.
I think you're probably right. And like John is saying, teams that have a first round bye have an advantage. Well, again, if you compare it to Notre Dame, what's the advantage?
Right.
Because again, you're just substituting one game. It's a shell game. It's either you're playing in a conference championship game or you're Notre Dame and you don't have to play in a conference champion. Again, it's like I just said, I just, went through this whole thing. Like, if you play in a conference championship game, that's your 13th game. If you lose that game, you still have to play a first, in that first round where Notre Dame has to play. Yeah. So you're playing your 14th game when Notre Dame is playing its 13th game. So how is that an advantage? It's only, and again, even if you win the conference championship game, okay, you get a bye, but you still had to play that 13th game.
Whatever that, you want to compare their 13th game, could be a 1 versus 2, 1 versus, it's going to be a top 10 ranked matchup. I think that's fairly safe to say, pending something crazy, right? And again, we're granting the scenario that Notre Dame is the number 1 team in the country, right?
Because
they play the Power 5.
But real quick, it is most likely going to be a top 10 matchup because conferences are also getting rid of their divisions, which means it's the top 2 teams in their conference, the true top 2 teams, and not, Ohio State versus Iowa or, who,
Right.
that,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Which is
where
almost like a bye. Like, I get that. I get
Right.
that part of it. But now it's going to be the top 2 teams in each conference playing off against each other. So you're looking at probably a top 10 matchup, top 15 at worst, right? And then Notre Dame is now the 5 seed, and they're hosting a group of 5 champion at their place in December. I don't see the pushback. I don't see the disadvantage for Notre Dame. And on top of that, they get the same amount of bye weeks as the teams that are the top 4.
Right.
They get 3 bye weeks. They just come in a different order. They get them all in a row, and the top 4 will get them all in a row, but 1 week over. Still 3 weeks of byes.
People are asking when the the playoff will start. This year, 2024, the first playoff game will be on December 20th. And remember, conference championship games are the first week of December. So Notre Dame would play, Notre Dame
would play Thanksgiving weekend.
Would play Thanksgiving weekend, then they wouldn't have to play again until either December 20th or December 21st. There's going to be 1 game on December 20th. There's going to be 3 games on December 21st. And then, so those are the first round games. There's going to be 4 first round games. And then after that, December 31st and January 1st are going to be the quarterfinals, semifinals January 9th and 10th, and then the championship game on January 20th. So that's kind of how the calendar lays out, So again, like Notre Dame, not only do they not have to play that game the first weekend of December, they get a longer break before they have to play the
3
first
full
game.
weeks.
Whereas if you play in those conference championship games, you're going to play right away. You're going to play the first week of December, and then you're going to play 2 weeks later as opposed to 3 weeks later in your first round playoff game.
Right.
So I like all that in Notre Dame's favor.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And you're not putting your players, I'll say it, at risk playing a top team in that conference championship game. They get to be at home, resting and recuperating and getting those 3 weeks off. So, I just don't see the negative. And then somebody said in here about does this benefit the number 3? Here we go. DK, doesn't that benefit the 3rd ranked team in each conference? It could, depending on who that 3rd ranked team. So year to year, it's going to depend.
But that's the other part of it as well that nobody talks about is the SEC and the Big Ten are each more likely to get a 3rd team in the playoff because of the fact that their conferences are swelling so big. They're each pretty likely to get them in there, and no one complains about that. You're only complaining about Notre Dame.
Well, and I saw that the most recent ideation or thought process for these Big Ten and SEC is they want a guaranteed 4 spots for each conference in the 12-team playoff. Like, that's kind of crazy to me. You're talking 4. That would be 4, 8, 9 guaranteed spots, right? Because you have 4 from the Big Ten. Well, no, it'd be more than that. 4 from the Big Ten, 4 from the SEC. Then you would have 1 Big 12. You would have 1 ACC. That's 10. And then you would have 1 group. So you'd have 1 at-large bid left. That's never going to fly. There's no way that's ever going to fly within a 12-team playoff.
Right. Anthony asks, what happens if Notre Dame is a 5 seed? Is he saying 5 seed and NBC owns their home game rights, but ESPN owns the rights to the playoffs? NBC only gets, as you said yourself, Anthony, NBC is paying for regular season games. It's no different than, like women's college basketball, where it's same but different. But for example, the Big Ten has a TV contract with Fox and NBC, and that pertains to basketball as well. But once the NCAA tournament starts, it's whoever the rights holder is, for the NCAA tournament, which in basketball, like on the women's side, is ESPN, / Disney. And just like right now, ESPN owns the right to the college football playoff. So they get the rights to those games. It doesn't matter that Notre Dame has the NBC contract. Those playoff games are going to be televised on ESPN or ABC, basically.
Right. and like I said, at the end of the day, and Joe says not to be a Debbie Downer, but it's based on the premise that Notre Dame has a good year.
Well, I mean,
Right. But that's the conversation that we're all having right now. Everybody's like, well, they can't get a 1 through 4 seed.
But it's also based on
right.
every team having a good year. Like, yeah, not everyone's going to make the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, but
Right?
again, Notre Dame is positioned extremely well because there's 7 at-large bids now as opposed to 6. So they've even increased the chances that Notre Dame has an opportunity to be in the playoffs. So I just think that their foothold got stronger with
Right.
the disillusion of the
Again,
Pac-12.
the conversation is about Notre Dame's independence. So if you're a Notre Dame fan, most Notre Dame fans want to remain independent, I think. I know that there are some here and there who would just as soon see Notre Dame join a conference, the Big Ten or whatever, but the majority of fans want Notre Dame to remain independent. So again, like if you're upset about not getting a first-round bye, do you want Notre Dame to remain independent, or would you give that up to get a first-round bye?
Right.
It's what it comes down to, I think, right?
I agree completely.
If that's the argument.
Right.
Do you want Notre Dame to remain independent or not?
If you do, then this is what you're giving up. And
Right.
again, when you break it down, I don't think they're giving up much. I really don't.
I don't either. You have the opportunity to host now, as again, as Joe and a couple of people have said, you're assuming that Notre Dame's going to have a good, because the only argument I think against most of what you've said, and I'm just sort of,
no, you're good,
nitpicking it a little bit, is most of your arguments are assuming that Notre Dame is like probably 1 loss or 0 losses, and they're going to be a 5 seed. There are going to be some years where maybe they have 2 losses, but they're going to be in the playoff, and they're going to be like a 10 or 11 seed as opposed to a 5, 6, 7, or 8 seed.
But here's the deal, right?
So they're not going to be at home is what I'm saying. But they still would have to play that,
Agreed.
conference championship game.
But guess what they still get, even if they're a 10 or 11 seed? 3 weeks off.
Correct.
So, you know what?
Because that is an advantage. Not having to play in that conference championship game in and of itself. Like I would almost, as somebody brought up, I would almost rather be the 3rd seed in a conference and not have to worry about playing that game, because you get the time off.
Yeah.
And your seeding for the most part is, pretty set, probably within a range of about 3 seeds. You kind of know where you're going to be. And you don't have to worry about playing that game. You don't have to worry about any travel. You don't have to worry about any injuries. You don't have to worry about winning or losing and, how far you're going to fall in terms of seeds if you lose that game. Like, to me, the benefits of not playing in that conference championship game far outweigh any negatives.
Well, and look, so there's going to be 8 teams playing in a Power 4 championship game, right? Let's pretend that all 8 of those teams get into the playoff, which isn't always going to be the case, right? That's not always going to be the case. So 4 of those teams are going to have to win 17 games potentially to win a national championship. 17. That's crazy, right? That's a lot of games to have to play. Right. Meanwhile, Notre Dame's, as Charlie Weiss would say, sitting at home eating cheeseburgers.
That's right.
Right? I mean, I don't see the downside.
That's 1 fewer game that you have to play.
Right. Because everybody always forgets about the losers of the conference championship game and how now they've played a 13th game and they're going to have to play 4 more after that if they want to win a national championship, assuming that they're even in the top 11 to get in to the 12-team playoff. Because, of course, one of those is the group of 5.
Now, I'm curious. USMA 87 says, people seem to forget what Sean mentioned earlier. Jack was in the room when it happened. Now, I'm curious because, I haven't followed like everything that USMA, I've seen him, make a couple comments. Do you mean that in a good way or a bad way?
That's fair. That's fair.
But, I mean, that is, again, Jack negotiate. This was a negotiation. He was in the room.
Part of it. Like, it wasn't just in the room. From what I understand, he was kind of one of the architects of the 12-team playoff format that they presented to the committee.
Again, along with Greg Sankey.
Right. Like he
The
was
most
part of it.
powerful, the most powerful conference commissioner
Yes.
in all of college athletics
Right.
now.
Him and Jack Swarbrick.
They together,
You're
and a
right.
handful of other people, came up with this format. And again, that was Notre Dame's concession, to the greater college football, that they would accept the fact that they couldn't get the, which again, I said this last week, and I said it a couple of years ago when this thing first, when this proposal first became public. It was the 6+6 because the Pac-12 still existed, and the whole thing. Again, my reaction was sort of what the rest of college football appears to have not paid any attention to for the last 3 years. It's
Seriously.
like, wow, Notre Dame's never going to get a first round bye. But again, as you start looking at it, and you start just the whole thing that we've discussed here, this game versus that game, and where you play it, and the fact that you have to play it, and the whole thing, I think that it is actually, again, if being independent is important to you, I think that you can give up a first round bye and get, as you said, more time off, not have to play, just the whole thing. It's not that bad when you sit back and look at it.
Even a 2-loss Notre Dame team has an opportunity to make the 12-team playoff, and they still get 3 weeks off. They still get a bye during the conference championship weekend. And I think it was DK.
USMA clarified, by the way.
Yes.
How are we irrelevant when our AD was in there? It was, it's
true. It's true. And the fact that Swarbrick is retiring and Pete Bavacqua is taking over is not going to change Notre Dame's seat at the table. It's not, because it's still Notre Dame, and they don't have a conference commissioner. They have an athletic director. And so it's not going to change Notre Dame's seat at the table, because at the end of the day, it's about money. And Notre Dame brings money to the table, period. So, yes, Jack did a great job of positioning Notre Dame in a great place when it comes to the playoff and all of that. Pete's just going to pick up the baton at this point.
And again, this goes back to what I was talking about, with Sankey being willing, to be okay with this, because again, he knows by keeping Notre Dame in the playoff and keeping them independent, it keeps them away from the Big Ten, because what does Notre Dame in the Big Ten do? It raises the value of the Big Ten and gives them a much more earning potential when it comes to TV contracts and all that stuff.
Absolutely. Oh, the Big Ten could renegotiate their TV contract tomorrow if Notre Dame said today that they wanted to be a part of the Big Ten.
I mean, think about what Notre Dame is getting. More money. Yeah, think about what the Big Ten is getting from Fox and NBC for their TV contract, and then look at what Notre Dame is getting for one school.
Right.
And then you would multiply that by adding Notre Dame into the Big Ten. And I don't think Notre Dame alone would double, that contract, but it would add significantly.
Oh, yeah.
I bet you add probably at least 50% to what they're getting right now.
Completely. The Big Ten would be quick to rip up that contract.
Right.
And be like, we're renegotiating. And that's the power of Notre Dame right there in a nutshell. And DK is mad because I was about to bring up his comment. And I do think...
Sorry. I just wanted to make sure and get a couple points in there before, it's like... We're all free-flowing here.
Right, absolutely. Which is where we shine. But DK says, as a number 3, you may get in before the loser of the conference championship game. I think that is a point, and DK, thank you for bringing that up. I think this is a point that is fascinating, and we're going to see it happen. The number 3 seed is going to be at home during the conference championship. And we're talking about number 3 in a conference, right? So whoever the number 3 is in the SEC, for example.
Okay.
They're going to be sitting at home with maybe 2 losses. Okay. And they're going to watch the conference championship game, eating them cheeseburgers, baby.
My cheeseburgers, right?
Yeah. Watching that championship game, and the loser could fall behind them. And the number 3 gets into the playoff, and the loser's out.
If the loser gets smoked in the conference championship game, number 3 is likely to end up with a better seed than number 2.
And number 2 might be out completely. Like, that's a definite
I don't think depending on
the situation.
Yeah,
You
I
know what
don't
I
think
mean?
they'd fall all the way out because, especially like Big Ten, SEC, I don't think they fall all the way out because
It would
again, they're not doing the divisions. They're going true,
right.
1v2 and
It
that
would be
kind of thing.
fascinating for me to see kind of how that all shakes out. Definitely they could be ranked higher. They could be seated higher. And so you've now been punished for playing in a conference championship game. You're going to see some pushback from some of these conference teams if this ends up happening on more than one occasion, and it's going to happen. It's going to
DK,
happen.
pretty,
This
pretty good, DK. That
That's good stuff.
might be the smartest thing you've ever said.
And that's a compliment.
I mean, it's better than any Lions take you've ever had. I'll say that.
There you go. Man.
By the way, thanks as always, Anthony Solomon, for the super chat.
Right, I want to, before we move on to rapid fire, because I know that's what's next. Salty.
I've got a few more comments here. I want to
good.
get in from the chat. I've got a few here that I've kind of been saving. So
Salty says, if you're number 3 in the conference, how often will you be in the top 12? Have you seen how many SEC teams are up there at the end of the year? Oh my God.
The SEC and the Big Ten are banking on it, and and again, it's also why they want to expand. Like there was the talk last week about a 14 team field that was being discussed before they even went to 12, because those two conferences want to make sure that they, at the very least, they're banking on not only getting their number 3 team in there, they're banking on getting their number 4 team in there. They're already working that angle.
Yeah, I think they feel like they're almost guaranteed to get 3, and now they're trying to squeeze a 4th one in there. Like that's how I feel that they're, the track that they're taking with this. Yeah,
right.
For sure.
Right. Someone posted over the weekend, if the 12-team format had been in place since the 4-team field, and I wish I still had it, but to kind of look specifically at this question, because I just looked at where Notre Dame was, and like Notre Dame, I think Notre Dame and Penn State, Michigan, they were all like Notre Dame was in like kind of right sort of above the fray. I think it was like 4, maybe 5 times or something like that they would have been in. But I'd be curious.
I remember seeing that one actually.
Yeah.
I thought it was 6 for some reason. No. Was it
the
4?
Obvious ones, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Ohio State were up at the top of the list. But then Notre Dame was actually right after those two.
I think they were like the third tier.
Notre Dame and Penn State would have been in the next most, I think.
They were in like the third tier-ish.
But again, like looking
DK,
I'd like to see, like for this, like in terms of the SEC and the Big Ten specifically, how many more, like Penn State would have been the consistent number 3 team out of the Big Ten, for example.
Right. And DK just said, he goes, just last year you had Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State from the Big Ten.
Right.
You had Georgia, Bama, Ole Miss from the SEC right there. And they're all in the top 12. So, I mean, yeah, it's going to be, I think that part's going to be fascinating. And it's not going to get talked about very much until it actually happens.
Yes. So as of right now, do you think there is a case that can be made against Notre Dame being independent? Like if you were to
do a debate,
to sit back and really, like look from the outside in, is there a real case against Notre Dame being independent?
The only case that I can conceivably come up with is that all of a sudden Notre Dame gets even more money hungry than they are currently, because
like the Big Ten is willing to double their TV revenue,
because technically they would make a lot more money going to the Big Ten. But that's the only benefit that I can see, and it's not like Notre Dame's hurting for money. They're not cash poor. You know what I mean? So I don't see that as a motivating factor for them to do it. But that's the biggest case that I could make that Notre Dame would want to join a conference.
Yeah, and that's the only answer I have as of right. And if that's your answer, what problem does that solve for anybody?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't solve any problems, right? It just gets Notre Dame a bigger paycheck, and it theoretically gets the Big Ten or whatever other conference they would get a bigger paycheck. There's really no problem, and that's the thing for all the the anti-Notre Dame outcry in all of this. There has never been a problem that it actually solves Notre Dame joining a conference. It's
Agreed.
just everybody else says, well, we're in a conference. Why shouldn't you be in a conference? When, like when you sit back and I realize that as fans, nobody wants to look at things rationally, but like if fans of Ohio State, Michigan, whatever schools they happen to be, who keep, trying to shout down Notre Dame, because I'm always surprised, like when I talk to other, people in the media, like the first thing that they want to talk about is, well, when's Notre Dame going to be at a conference? It seems like they're going to be forced to join a conference pretty soon. Well, no, I don't really think so.
Right.
It's just because, again, what problem does it solve? Everyone from the TV networks and everything that we've talked about, everyone is really pretty happy with the whole setup right now. Like,
Yeah.
Sure, the Big Ten would love to have Notre Dame, but that's broken down at different points. And for the most part, Big Ten schools sure seem happy to play against Notre Dame because Notre Dame seems to find, as Jack Swarbrick has said, no one's ever turned them down when they've called them and talked about playing them. And, they get calls from all over the country, So I don't see a true argument,
No.
that says this is why Notre Dame has to, because like this thing alone, Notre Dame is willing to make a concession by being the number 5 seed, by never being able to get one of those first round buys.
Right. And it's all about what Notre Dame wants. They
Right.
have incredible power right now. They control whatever they want, right? They control their own destiny, as they say, right? If they want to join a conference, there's no shortage of conferences that would want Notre Dame because, like you said, they would rip up their TV deal tomorrow and renegotiate it, and everybody would be making more money. So there's no conference that would say no to Notre Dame right now.
See, like D-Rock, D-Rock says independent till we get bumped out of the college football playoff path. If that happens, time for a conference. And that's really,
I agree.
That's really it at this point. But I think, like just having Notre Dame involved, potentially involved, assuming they're good enough, obviously, year in and year out, involved in the college football playoff, that seems to be good enough. Again, what problem does it solve? Like right now, like there's better odds for everybody that Notre Dame can be involved, given the current format and everything else.
Oh, and look, like you said, Greg Sankey, who is the number 1 most powerful commissioner in sports, right? He understands what Notre Dame's independence means and how it can benefit him. And he will help to make sure that Notre Dame stays independent if that's what Notre Dame wants to do. Period.
Correct. Ryan Roberts' forehead. BYU's in a conference. I don't know. Did somebody bring up BYU?
They said
BYU earlier.
Notre Dame and BYU should play in a conference championship game.
Oh,
but
BYU is in the Big 12 as of this year.
Right.
So they gave independence a run, and they found out
it didn't work out
how difficult
too well.
it is. That's right.
Because it did not work.
Because the biggest thing, they didn't have that TV contract.
Right.
But there's also just not as much interest in BYU as there
and
is
they realized in 2020 that being independent didn't work out too well. I mean, they were literally looking for games from week to week. And I realized the COVID thing was a different situation, but they realized real quick what happens when you're an independent. And guess who didn't have a problem finding games? Notre Dame, because they got swallowed up, no problem, by the ACC.
Now, Andre asks, what if an 8-4 power conference champion that is put in one of the first 4 spots and Notre Dame in the 5th spot? There's not an 8-4 team that's going to win a conference.
Because they probably wouldn't be in the conference championship game. I wouldn't
like if it was a down year, for example.
Like in the ACC?
Yeah, I guess theoretically an 8-4 team could. Yeah.
That would be great for Notre Dame because guess who they would play if Notre Dame was a 5 seed? And guess who Notre Dame
You'd
plays
actually
in the
want
second
that.
round?
Yeah, like
you
want that as Notre Dame because you get to play the 12, which is most likely going to be a group of 5. You would want, because that 8-4 team would be the 4 seed, and that's where Notre Dame would play in the second game. So you would actually want that. That's a great point, Vince.
Yeah. So I mean,
not the best point you've made, but still a good point nonetheless.
All right.
I'm just saying, in comparison to DK,
no, I know.
Like, he made the best point that he's ever made.
Oh.
you've had plenty of good points.
Yeah,
Before.
yeah.
Right, DK?
There you go. That's for DK.
Andre also said, what if Notre Dame creates their own Power 5 conference?
Hey, we've talked about, like, Brian and I have talked about that in shows before, when all this conference realignment and stuff was happening, what if Notre Dame just went and made their own conference? I mean, it is fascinating to think about, and it's fun to think about. It's like a, kind of a think tank kind of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
And could it work? I honestly think at the end of the day, it probably could, but it's probably not going to happen. It's probably not going to happen. I do think it could be a fascinating thing though. If Notre Dame was just like, we want you, and you, let's go make a conference together. I don't think they would get a lot of no's. I'm sorry. I don't think they would get a lot of no's. I think that they would get a lot of yeses, or at the very least, like, okay, well, tell me about this. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I think there would be positive reception.
And the big driver behind that would be, well, yeah, but
and
the fact that they're already attached to NBC,
right.
like what else could they get from NBC
Correct.
and potentially a second TV partner that would make that attractive for everybody? But just by having Notre Dame attached to it is, the biggest draw. Like, I'll be curious to see. I realize they're going to get a lot more money out of this whole thing, but 5 years from now, what Oregon and USC and UCLA and Washington all think about playing in the Big Ten and all the travel. I think that is. There are a lot of issues going on at UCLA that apparently they're hemorrhaging money right now. That is a big issue. But they are going to get a big paycheck now from the Big Ten. But the fact that Chip Kelly left there, I think, tells you a lot about that situation. And I just think that there would be some schools, especially 5 years or so down the road, that would be more than interested if Notre Dame were to strike up a conversation about forming another conference.
And I think they could take some teams away from the SEC and the Big Ten. I do. I think Penn State would be maybe a first phone call. I think that there are teams that they would call that would be more than happy to leave the Big Ten or the SEC. I do. We could talk about what teams those would be and all that. That's a different show for a different time. But I think there would be intrigue there. Especially if Notre Dame had a TV partner all ready to go, and you could just lay out like, this is what we could do right here. Do you want to be a part of this? I think there would be teams that would jump at the chance.
Yeah, Brent's saying who's in the conference. I mean, you kind of answered that, like Florida State's not very happy with where they are in the ACC right now. Like, would you go the route of trying to get other, like the Vanderbilts and the Dukes and Northwesterns have been talked about before? I don't I think it,
not
especially from a football standpoint,
right?
It needs to be a little bit more high profile, like Penn State.
Not exclusively.
You talked about Florida State.
Yeah.
Maybe even Miami, like USC.
Oh, sure.
Like,
yes, I think USC would be open to it. I do. And you could bring in an Oregon, that kind of a thing if you wanted. Like, I do think that they would extend an olive branch to the Stanfords and the Northwesterns and the Vanderbilts. I do think that would happen, but you also have to balance it out. They're not stupid. They're not going to be like, we're the all academic conference like that. They're not going to do that because the networks aren't going to pay for that. That would not be something that they would want to put on, right? And so I think they would extend an olive branch just like the SEC has Vanderbilt and the Big Ten has Northwestern, right? But I think that they could go out and get some big names. I do.
Salty says, what would make that conference any different than just joining? Okay, hold it. Is this in response to something else? I thought he was saying, he said, what makes that different than joining our conference? I thought he was saying a conference. So I don't know.
I think if Notre Dame did that, I think they could potentially outpace the Big Ten and the SEC from a money standpoint. I think they could promise it and get it.
The only drawback to that is how much power Notre Dame would ultimately wield in this, conference structure. Because it's great from a Notre Dame perspective to say, well, Notre Dame could go out and form this conference. But if you're one of the other schools, how beholden, do you want
Sure.
sort of the image to be that you're beholden to Notre Dame? Like,
Yeah.
how much power do they actually have in this structure versus, does Notre Dame essentially put this conference together, and then the conference, or then the schools, once they form
You're
a
all
conference, do
equal.
they go
Yeah.
outside and kind of
Right.
go outside of the Notre Dame realm and
Sure.
install a conference commissioner, conference, to sort of run this thing? Or is Notre Dame
Yeah.
actually, have the power? Is Notre Dame actually in charge going forward? Because I don't know, because I mean, just look at the jealousy and just the anti Notre Dame from the outside that we've talked about in this whole thing. How much would schools sort of want to, kind of actually give in to that, I guess.
Yeah, and it could be like, okay, for example, a situation like the Big 12 used to have. Texas and Oklahoma, Texas specifically, used to run the Big 12. I mean, let's be honest, right? And there were schools that didn't like that. They resented
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
you could create a negative vibe like
Nebraska.
that
That's why
too.
Nebraska's in the
Yeah.
Big Ten.
Yeah, exactly. And Nebraska would be another one I'd go after, by the way. Because I don't think they fit in the Big Ten. Like, I would take schools that don't fit. You know what I mean? Like Penn State.
My only argument against that is like it's an old brand and there's not a big TV market around Nebraska that's going to benefit you a lot.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Like I said,
Because
though,
that's,
it would be
again, like when
fascinating.
you look at how these things have shaped up, getting those TV markets and, all these, but it's, I don't know. Yeah. Like when you look at the like the cutting the cord and all these different things, like how
Sure.
much impact having some of those markets actually means.
Yeah.
Like right now, I think it's just constantly changing
That's
what
the
the
thing.
actual value of a lot of these things is.
And that's why they did a 5-year deal with NBC, right?
Right.
Let's come full circle with it, right? That's because you just never know what the landscape of college football is going to be in 5 years.
Yeah.
You just don't. And at the end of the day, I would love for it to be the Chip Kelly, vision of college football. All the other sports go back to the original conferences, man. Like the regional conferences. College football is its own thing.
It really, that's
go.
what it comes down to, is that it just needs to be football does its own thing.
Yes.
And all the conferences for every other sport, you just go back to the regional.
Right. Football
aspect.
is just different.
Yeah.
And I think we can all appreciate that. It just is. You can keep basketball the same. You can keep college basketball. Let's get back to the old Big East. Let's get back the AC. Let's get back to what it used to be. The ACC dominated that, the Big East dominated the East Coast, like let's get back to that when it comes to every other sport. And then football is just its own thing and they can figure out football.
All these, like think about Boston College and Miami and Florida State. And then you think about Cal and Stanford sitting out there on the West Coast. Right. And starting next year, they're all going to be making these trips,
it makes no sense.
I know.
It makes no sense that the Oregon cross country team has to go to Boston College, in the fall to run a race. It's just in the middle of the week, by the way. It just makes no sense. So it feels like, hey, bell bottoms are back. Like eventually it's going to go full circle and they're just going to figure out that maybe we had it right in the first place and we need to kind of go back.
Right. Appreciate that, D-Rock.
Woo! D-Rock hasn't been really in our shows a lot lately, so it's nice to see him back.
DK, much appreciated, because I think you understand the spirit of the jokes that we were throwing at you earlier.
And he's saying they can't afford it. And he's talking about all the other sports. But here's the thing.
Well,
the football teams will be making plenty, just like it is now. Football and basketball pay for everything else. Football will still make a truckload of money, and that helps pay for everything else.
Well, and I can't remember
down because they're not traveling across the country.
I can't remember if I've talked with you, but the way basketball, like for example, the Cal Stanford issue for the ACC, what it's going to be structured so that each basketball team is going to have a travel partner. And
okay.
every other year you will go out, because Cal and Stanford are not that far apart. They're in the Bay Area out there in California. So, like, for example, Notre Dame and Louisville will go to the West Coast on the same weekend. Notre Dame would play Stanford on Thursday. Louisville would play Cal on Thursday. And then they would both just stay out there and swap, where Notre Dame would go to Cal and then Louisville. And then in the other years where you don't travel to the West Coast, Cal and Stanford would travel to you and, make the same kind of swap, with your travel partners. Like right now in basketball, you have, 4 repeat opponents a year. But when Cal and Stanford and SMU come on next year, you're only going to have that one repeat opponent. And then theoretically that repeat opponent is going to be your travel partner when you have to go to the West Coast. But you're only going to make that West Coast trip once every 2 years. And again, you're going to basically, stay out there for 5 days as you make that swap. So
gotcha. That makes sense.
That's at least for basketball, the way they're going to, try to get around that, some of those long trips. I would imagine for baseball, like baseball, softball, it's going to be a little bit tougher because you have,
weekend
3-game series and the whole thing.
That's going to be tough. And it's like they're making the
softball,
best.
I guess is not as hard because, like you can play multiple games. I think with softball, you could do the same thing. Go ahead.
I was going to say that, they're, at least basketball wise, they're making the best out of a crappy situation. The bottom line is those West Coast teams are going to get screwed. I mean, because they got to travel. They got to travel so much. I mean, half their conference games are obviously on the road, and almost all of those are going to be on the other side of the country.
Right.
It's not a quick bus trip, or
it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, man, they're going to suffer. They are going to suffer.
And there's also going to be, like, Dallas is obviously a little bit closer, but with SMU coming in, there'll be trips. I would imagine if you're not going to California, you're probably going to go to Dallas that year. I
forgot about SMU.
To play SMU. Yeah.
Okay.
But there have been talks, and I haven't heard if this has gone anywhere, because of where, Dallas and SMU is located and the fact that you have pretty good weather there. There have been talks about some of these, lower revenue sports, like sort of using Dallas and that area and the facilities there as a midpoint. Yeah. To sort of like, play some games so that you didn't have to make, the treks out to the coast and all that different kind of stuff.
Just crazy.
So, be really curious to see exactly how it all comes down. But that basketball format, from what I understand, that's pretty firm on how they're going to do that. So
I'm very interested to see, like, 5 years down the line, what people still think about these coast to coast conferences,
Mm-hmm.
So
for sure.
We'll see.
All right, Vince, with that, are you ready for rapid fire?
I am so ready for rapid fire. When I read your questions today, it got me a little excited on some of them.
All right. I'm glad. So Mike Denbrock, of course, new offensive coordinator for Notre Dame, asked how important running the ball is to success for the Fighting Irish and their offense. Here's what he had to say.
I do believe that still, and I think everything that you do has to be built around a strong running game. And now, does that mean that it's going to be 60 times a game? It doesn't mean that. I mean, it means that when we do call runs, that we give our guys a chance, right? Numbers-wise, number one. Number two, we put them in a position from a scheme standpoint to take advantage of what the defense is trying to do, and then we execute it. But I think any great offense revolves around the ability to be able to run the ball. Now, with having said that, I will say that I think I'm more open than I was years ago to not just pounding my head against a brick wall and just understanding that the game has changed, and the more athletes you can get out in space and create mismatches is also a good way to play offense. So there'll be a good balance of that, and there'll be afternoons where we run it 50 times, and there'll be afternoons where we may throw it 50.
So that's Mike Denbrock. Father David says, get a new picture of Coach Denbrock. We
don't like all that purple
uniform
Ugly.
Right now. Yeah. Anything stand out to you, Vince? What you heard there?
Well, first of all, it's good football to have to know that you need a running game to open up your pass game. That's just good football, right?
Mm-hmm.
What stood out to me, and I guess I'm not overly surprised, but he said you don't just have to run between the tackles to have a good run game, because getting the ball to the perimeter is also an extension of the run game. And we've talked about that so many times on Upon Further Review about the run game and what it looks like and what extensions of the run game and all those different things. So it's not just going to be handing the ball off and be like, oh, we got to run the ball. We got to run the ball. It's going to look different, which I think is huge. Absolutely huge. And you can tell that Mike Denbrock's been around the block. He knows what he needs to do to kind of get an offense going. And I love that. I love it.
His offensive philosophy has evolved since he was here with Brian Kelly the last time, because he was essentially running Brian Kelly's, calling plays out of Brian Kelly's offense. And, it wasn't his offense. He went to Cincinnati and he actually, was able to sort of formulate his own offense, his own approach. And you heard him talk about getting guys out in space. And to me, we had the people ask last week about, 11 personnel and stuff, where Mike Denbrock talked about 11, standing there listening to him, he never mentioned any, personnel packages, 10, 11, 12, 21, any of that.
Because he's not going to paint himself into a box like that.
This was the closest thing that he came to that. And hearing him talk about athletes out in space, I think that, is maybe where that reference came from. To me, it means you don't have to have an extra tight end on the field to run the football. Just what you said. Exactly. You don't have to run the ball between the tackles to run the football. There are a lot of different things that you can do about it and or do with it. And we've talked about it before, especially when Tommy Rees was here, but even this year as well with Jared Parker. There was less of it, I think, with Jared Parker, definitely more with Tommy Rees. All you're doing by bringing that extra tight end on the field is bringing more hats into the box. And that, to me, makes it more difficult for you to run the football. So that's not how it's a very old school way of thinking, I think, to think that you have to have an extra tight end out there to run the football. So as he said, formationally, you can do different things and still be very effective running the football. It doesn't all have to look the same. Yeah. And I think the way college football has evolved,
oh my gosh,
there's a lot more of that than maybe what we've seen here at Notre Dame the last few years.
Oh, I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised. I really do. Just based on what the offense is, what could and will look like with Denbrock at the helm. It's going to be, can't wait.
Yep. All right. So we also, of course, got to talk to Max Bull, the new linebackers coach, recently, and he was asked about spring priorities, and specifically, is spring about seeing how many positions these linebackers can play? Because we've seen a lot about cross training in the last few years. Is spring about doing that, or is it about saying, hey, this is your position, now let's build the depth chart around that? Here is how Max Buller responded to that.
That varies person by person, player by player. The young guys will try to get them in a spot, get them to learn it, get them to be comfortable in one spot. Then there's guys like Jack Kaiser, even Drake Bowen, that have to know. We have to be able to put you in there with different people, and you have to be able to play the complementary position to them. Like Jalen Sneed, Jaden Osbury are going to be at Rover, you know what I mean? Or they're going to be at money. Whereas if it's Kaiser and Drake in there, Kaiser's probably the money. But if it's Kaiser and Sneed in there, Sneed's the money, Kaiser's the MAC. So to answer your question, there's two different, I wouldn't say tiers, there's two different groups. One group, hey, you got to know it all, because I got to be able to grab you by the helmet and throw you out there. Whoever's out there, you got to go to the other spot. And then there's the young guys or other guys that are specialized in certain areas, have a certain skill set that we'll try to lock in one spot.
At least Max Bull is wearing Notre Dame gear in his photo, I guess. Father David can be happy about that.
He loves to pound that table.
Yeah. Before I ask you the questions, I want to note something, because you probably heard a couple new terms in there. He talked about the MAC and the money position.
Yes.
If you picked up on that. So MAC and the money are the nickel package. So when the nickelback is on the field, instead of Will and Mike, you have the MAC and the money linebacker. So those become essentially different positions themselves. So those are the two. Basically, money is the Will linebacker. MAC is the middle linebacker in the nickel package. In the base package, it's just the same as it's always been. So just wanted to explain that.
Okay,
first.
so basically the money is the will in the dime or in the nickel package.
In the nickel, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Right, yeah,
Which makes sense.
He didn't go into dime package, but yeah,
right.
But
Which makes sense. I mean,
yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So just kind of explaining that, the general philosophy that he was talking about, does that feel like a shift to you compared to what we've kind of seen, especially specific to the linebackers the last few years?
It's a huge shift because before all we ever heard was everybody has to know everything.
Right.
And so we had a bunch of jack of all trades, master of none, which I mean, could you say that the defense has been successful? Sure. But at the same time, I personally subscribe to the theory that you get really freaking good at one position. And if that's the case, then you can start learning some other stuff.
Right.
It's
especially as a freshman walking in the door.
Right. Exactly. It's
because it's one thing to be J.D. Bertrand and Maris Leofau and Jack Kaiser, who've been around for a few years.
Right.
When you're walking in the door your first spring, I don't think you need to be focused on trying to play 3 different positions. I think, as you said, you need to learn one the best you can, get as good as you can at that, and then start branching out after that.
And it's like, algebra, right? You learn your algebra before you move on to calculus. You got to have a good foundation before you can move on. And that's exactly how I feel about linebacker play or any football position for that matter, right? Now, wide receiver is a little bit different. You can learn all 3 wide receiver positions, I think, and still be okay because it lends itself to that. But at linebacker, man, learn one. And I'm glad that that's going to be the focus. And he specifically said 2 guys are going to learn more than one position, essentially, Kaiser and Drake Bowen. And I thought that was interesting too.
And that leads me to my next question. But just making sure, because I can't remember which freshman linebacker it was last year, but I remember asking him specifically the question about what are you focused on right now? He's like, well, I'm learning all 3. And it's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Why are you having freshmen do that in their first spring when they're early enrollees, first spring on campus? So I think it's great that, like, hearing him talk about that sort of basically saying the younger you are and the more raw you are, you're going to focus on one thing, get good. And then once you're good at that, then you're going to move on to the next thing. I think simplifying makes a lot of sense. But then you heard him talk about Drake Bowen. Does it sound like he's kind of the front runner, like the guy to beat at the mic right now?
He used his name and Kaiser's name in the same sentence. I feel like that tells you a lot.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I just, he kind of put those 2 in like a different category from everybody else. I mean, he basically said, he's like, you got 2 groups. You got these 2 and you got everybody else.
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
To me, there's the starters. Here's everybody else. Like, I feel like that's kind of where things stand right now. And I'm not overly surprised about that.
Yeah, now, there were other, obviously, questions that he got where he talked about, some other guys like Jalen Sneed, Jaden Osbury. Those are kind of the top 2 guys, it sounds like, at the Rover right now. Now, that doesn't mean that those guys, again, because they've been around for a little bit, might not, mix in and, especially in different sub packages and stuff like that, kind of see where they fit at some other positions. But yeah, I mean, it sure sounds to me like Drake Bowen is right up there at the top, and Jack Kaiser, because of where he, and he talked about Kaiser being bulked up a little bit more and, sort of being able to hold his own more. He's up closer to 230 right now. So he's added a little beef, and it's amazing that Drake Bowen, especially for as fast as he is like even bigger than that. He's up around, 240. So that guy,
I wouldn't want to be the catcher in the way of him at home plate. Just going to throw that out there.
No kidding.
I would say Kaiser is now making his body one where I think he will be a very good Will, and I think Drake Bowen will be a very good Mike. And I think the battle is on for Rover. Like that's how I feel where things are.
I agree for sure. Brent, I don't know if Brent left us or not, but he was, throwing this out there earlier. He said Dallas visits the 49ers again in 2024. What say you? I don't know if you're trying to get me to come out there and hang or something, but like if you want to buy the tickets, Brent, I'd be more than glad to come out there and, like watch you and Jesse beat each other up in the parking lot or something before Cowboys 49ers. But where I stand right now, I'm not spending, very much money on anything Cowboys related if that's what you were alluding to. So. Holtz my beer. This goes back to the main topic earlier in the show. He says, when the ACC inevitably implodes, what does Notre Dame do? Where do they go? Land a similar deal with the Big 12? Big 10 will say no chance without full membership. Same with the SEC. Vince, your answer.
This is easy, honestly, for me. They go back to the Big East. If you look at the members of the Big East right now, it's a great basketball conference. It's a great basketball conference, at least on the men's side. I can't really speak to the women's side. Maybe you can do that better than I can. But if you look, you got
women's side is mostly UConn, but you've got like Marquette and Creighton as solid teams.
Marquette, Creighton, DePaul, Butler, Xavier, Georgetown, Villanova, Seton Hall, St. John's, Providence, and UConn. That's where you send your
all the Catholic schools.
That's where you send your Olympic sports. 100%.
You get to stay. Yeah.
I don't even think I think it's a no-brainer.
Football.
Because they don't have football. So there you go. I think the answer is right there in front of you. And to be honest with you, outside of women's basketball, there might be a better conference all around. Man,
the only question would be if it comes to that, because now everyone is going to be ticked off that you're, like everything, whatever has, like the ACC is going to be blaming, Notre Dame for them falling apart because Notre Dame wouldn't sign up full force. The Big Ten is going to be mad at them because they won't join the Big Ten. Like, are you, again, like as of right now, what Jack Swarbrick says was everyone's lining up to schedule Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. Are you still going to be able to put together a good year in and year out schedule remaining independent in football? Or is everyone going to be ticked off enough at you that they're going to say, no, I don't want to play you?
They will be ticked off to a degree until they realize how much money they can make when Notre Dame comes to town.
That's right.
That's it. I'm sorry, but people
are going to sell out their stadium still, just like the ACC. Like again, it's like the ACC. Now I get it. The conference commissioner would prefer that Notre Dame is a full-fledged member, but he's also, like the actual athletic directors. I don't think they're that, they're that upset when Notre Dame comes to town and they sell out their stadium for that game. Right?
How happy was the
fact that they get on national TV most of the time in the process?
How happy was the ACC when Notre Dame had to join their conference for a year, right? I mean, they were over the moon. They were ecstatic.
Yeah.
And it was great for all parties.
And that's why they want them full time.
That's exactly why they want them full time. Teams in the Big Ten may be upset. Teams in the SEC may be upset, but they will continue to schedule Notre Dame. Just mark my words.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably the only thing. Now, again, remember, as of right now, until and unless Florida State actually finds a way out of this grant of rights, the grant of rights still lasts like 13 more years.
Yeah.
So, like it at least for right now, Notre Dame's involvement helps keep the ACC together and helps them get as much money as they're getting. But that's like Notre Dame joining the ACC potentially full-time 13 years from now. If it came to that might be the only thing that keeps the ACC together beyond 2036 is if they could actually get Notre Dame to join up. I don't think it's going to happen, but that's probably the only thing that's going to keep the ACC together at this point.
Yeah, you're probably not wrong. Unfortunately, I just don't see Notre Dame doing it. I mean, they try to help out the ACC every chance they get. They do, but I don't know that they're going to go that far. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't see it.
So speaking of, I guess we weren't talking about the SEC. We were earlier. We were just talking about the ACC, but SEC commissioner. I was adding an extra C. SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey has a proposal to unclutter the busy month of December. The plan would make the entire month of December a dead period for recruiting. Now, as of right now, the last 2 weeks of December are a recruiting dead period, but this plan would make the entire month a dead period. Mm-hmm. It would also move the early signing period up from the middle of December to the first week of the month. So the early signing period would be after the end of the regular season, but right away in that first month of December before the conference championship games are played. They would also change the transfer portal. Now, they haven't decided exactly, well, nothing has been decided, but this proposal would potentially eliminate the December window altogether and only have the spring window for the transfer portal. So what do you think about this?
There are so many
and you might need to take it point by point because there are 3 different points here, obviously.
You know, as far as the entire month of December being a dead period for recruiting, honestly, I'm fine with that because especially with the 12-team playoff, if you're in the playoff, if you're one of the 12 teams in the play, you need to be preparing for the playoff. Like it stinks when you have to pull double duty, right? When you have to split your focus between recruiting and preparing. And so making the entire month of December a dead period, I'm actually okay with that.
And this proposal is sort of with an eye on the fact that the playoff is expanding, and you're going to have even more going on in December now.
Because if you're not in the playoff, you've got a kind of a one-up on those teams that are in the playoff because you can just focus entirely on recruiting and whatever crap-ass bowl game that you got into. And so I do like the December dead period. So that point number 1, I'll give a thumbs up.
Okay, I'm with you there.
Okay, point number 2, the early signing period. I'm fine with that too. And in fact, I am a proponent of moving the early signing period to August. So it's before the senior years of these guys. So that they don't have to worry about all the garbage during their senior year. Most of these guys know where they're going.
I agree with that, like late July or early August.
Yeah, right.
The article I read at Yahoo Sports, Ross Dellinger had it, and he talked directly to Greg Sankey. Sankey mentioned there's been stuff floated around about moving the early period to June, which I had not heard before.
That's
reading
early.
this.
Okay.
But high school coaches, specifically high school coaches in Texas, which is obviously a hotbed, don't seem that hot on the month of June. I don't know why, June as opposed to late July or August, because that seems really early.
That's a little early for me too. Yeah. Because there's a lot of stuff that happens in summertime. There are a lot of guys that get scholarship offers in the summertime. You know what I mean? So I would still,
you're going to camps and stuff like that still.
I would still want that summertime for these guys to, some of these late bloomers, that kind of stuff. Like I would still want that. Like, for example, I can only use my own example, right? My own experience. Like, we're planning on going to these different camps in June because all these schools want to see my kid kick in person. They want to see it with their own eyes. That's all in June. So if they have the early signing period, some of those spots might be taken. You know what I mean? So I would push it to the end of the summer, and I think that would be good. But they're moving it up a little bit. I would give it like a half thumbs up, like a sideways thumb. I would still.
No, I agree. Like, seems like you're still evaluating in June. Again, like that's when the camps are for the most part. Like, why? I don't think that there's any reason to move it up that far. Late July, early August, but So I'll be curious to see exactly where that goes. I don't mind moving it to like the first week of December as opposed to the middle of December. If that's the only, if that's maybe sort of an incremental option right now to at least move it up a little bit, get it done, and then make the rest of the month a dead period. I don't mind that as much, but I agree. I would still rather have it like late July or early August.
Because most high school teams, at least in the North, are done by December, like with their high school seasons. And so that's why you would put it there. Like, I would not want the signing period to be in the middle of the season. Like, that's kind of crazy. So it either have to be before or after. But there's still plenty of high school kids that are playing in December too. So, or in that early part of December in the warmer states, right? So I don't know. I just I'm still a proponent of doing it before the season starts. Let these guys have their senior year.
I think that makes sense. The portal thing.
Yeah, this is where I have a big problem, actually.
Because I think that, there's obviously, there's a benefit for everyone to getting the transfer portal going in December so that, and you obviously, it's hard to push it later in December because you want these guys to have their decisions made so they can enroll it.
They can enroll.
Like Riley Leonard and RJ Oben and Jordan Clark. Right.
That's the issue. That's the 100% issue. Yes, you can have a dead period, but it's not dead for transfers. I still
Right.
think that you need to be able to recruit these transfers because they
Right.
need to be able to enroll first
Yeah.
week of January sometimes.
High school dead period, but transfers have to be handled differently.
Because you want those transfers to be here in the spring, and if they can't enroll in January, they're not going to be here in the spring.
Yeah.
So it totally shoots down the whole transfer portal thing. I would not like that at all.
I would have to think that there is more benefit to keeping a transfer portal window open in December than there is just pushing the whole thing to the end of spring, because I realize you have more time on your hands at the end of spring. But again, like, if you're having spring practice and you've got a new quarterback, for example, you're bringing in a quarterback, you want that guy to be on campus with your team in the spring and not have to wait until summer, after the spring is over. Like, you're wasting everybody's time potentially by pushing it to the end of spring practice and doing
Absolutely. 100%. Because you got a bunch of false competitions and, all these different things. And why would you want to wait to see who's going to be where until the fall? And now you're preventing a lot of these guys from the spring to transfer, frankly. If they get beat out and they're not going to play, they usually find that out in the spring, and then they can jump in the portal and do their own thing. If they don't find out till the fall, now they're stuck for another year. And so if you're truly trying to be for the players, you can't do that. You can't do that.
Concur. Bears quarterback Justin Fields said on the St. Brown Brothers podcast with Amon Ra and Equanimous.
Of course they have a podcast.
I know, right? That it's no big deal that he has unfollowed the Bears and the NFL on Instagram. Fields says just because you don't follow the girl on IG doesn't mean you're not messing around with her. And, this kind of whole thing, it blew up over the weekend. Do you buy or sell Justin Fields' explanation?
I sell social media in general because people read too much into
now
likes.
That's part of his explanation is like people read too much into the social media. They're basing too much on it.
At the same time, if you're going to be on social media and you're going to be a public figure, you got to be smart about what you're doing.
You know that people are going to read too much into it. So
100% sell his excuse because he knew damn well what he was doing.
Right.
You have to try to unfollow somebody, first of all.
Right.
Like it's a challenge. Like I always tell these kids when I am in my office, like, you got to try to fail as bad as you're failing right now. Like you have to try to go in and unfollow people. It doesn't just accidentally happen. You know what I mean? He knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't buy it even a little bit. He's kind of being childish about the whole thing.
No, I know. Like you can try to play it off and whatever. You're absolutely like there is a mute function on social media, right? You don't have to don't have to unfollow some. You can just mute because his whole thing is I don't want that in my timeline because it's too much drama and that's all I'm seeing, and I just want to separate myself from that so that I'm away from the drama. He just wants to get it over with, is what he's saying. Either he's going to be with the team account, or they're going to trade him. And I get that. But if that's the case, just hit the mute. And it takes it right out of your timeline. Like that's all you have to do. You don't have to unfollow him. But you're absolutely right. He knew exactly the kind of attention that it was going to draw. Like he can sit there and say that people place too much value on what you're doing on social media, but he knew, like, he's of that age. He knows exactly how much importance, like especially people in his age demographic and the media are going to place on that.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And if you really, just wanted to, get away from it, then delete your account, or
there's that too,
or just delete the app. Delete the app on your phone so that you're not getting the notifications and everything else, but you didn't delete your account. It's still there, whatever.
And a lot of the Notre Dame players, at least they tell, they'll talk about it without even being asked about it. They talk about how they, especially during the season, they'll delete the app from their phone and, just completely remove themselves from it.
Pretty
They're not told they have to, but a lot of them do it just so that they're not getting, because, let's face it, one bad game. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people, who blow up these guys' social media accounts with a lot of different BS, right?
So
And so they
bad.
just remove themselves from it.
And
That would be
that's
the
the
thing to do.
smartest thing to do.
Yeah.
Smartest thing to do. So no, I don't buy any of that nonsense. None of it.
So the Cubs have agreed
Finally.
to a contract with Mr. Cody Bellinger over the weekend, $80 million for 3 years. Do you buy or sell your Chicago Cubs, Vince D'Addario, as a legit contender after locking up Cody Bellinger?
They are a legit contender in the Central. That's as far as I'm willing to go. And if you're a legit contender in your division,
you're
then
a
that means
legit
you make the
contender
playoffs,
yeah.
right? And if you're in, you got to be at the dance in order to get the girl. So that gets them in the dance. And so I think they've got the second best odds behind the Cardinals to win the division, right? And I think that's exactly where they need to be. I think they got a great coach. I think they've got a lot of pieces. I do. I think they have a lot of pieces. Now, a lot of those pieces are going to have to perform to the best of their ability. You know, you can't have a bunch of injuries because I don't think that they're deep enough, even though their farm system is loaded, but those guys aren't all ready to be major leaguers. So, yes, they are contenders, but a lot of things have to go their way too. Does that make sense? Like, no, I like Craig Counsell. I think he's going to put the pieces where they need to go and be competitive all season long.
And it's not like Craig Counsell has not had some good players in Milwaukee, but he had, in part because of what the division is, but also in part because of the way he manages. He kept the Milwaukee Brewers contenders with lower payrolls
and less talent.
And
absolutely
less talent overall than teams like the Cubs and the Cardinals the last few years. So I think it starts with him, but having Bellinger is definitely a good bedrock piece. Yeah. And I agree. I think that's a good way to put it. I would consider them at least legit contenders in the Central, and because if you win your division, that makes you a legit contender in your league. So I think they're legit. But to me, it starts with Craig Counsell. I think that it's a step up. By the way, I think it's odd. Like, David Ross was doing TV, and I thought he was pretty good at TV.
It was Sunday Night
before
Baseball.
He became a manager. Is he doing? I haven't heard anything about him potentially doing any ESPN or anything like that this year.
I haven't heard anything. Maybe, I think there was still some time on his contract, so he's probably still getting paid. But yeah, I'm a little surprised myself, to be honest with you, because I thought he was very good. I thought he was very good, to be honest with you.
Maybe he's a little shell-shocked, after getting canned by the Cubs. Maybe he doesn't want that public, or I don't know.
I looked up. I just Googled David Ross and I hit news. It brings up like the most recent news. It's all from November, like when they kind of made this move, and so getting him out and bringing in Craig Counsell. So,
Jesse was always pretty down on David Ross. I never felt like the teams that he managed never felt like the organization was fully invested in giving him his best team. But there are a lot of micro moves that, as the manager, that again, like if my choice is Craig Counsell or David Ross, I'm going to take Counsell every day of the week because Counsell has already proven himself to be a superior game manager.
If we're comparing the two, Craig Counsell wins the battle of better manager. There's no doubt about that. I also agree with you, though, that David Ross wasn't given all the tools to be successful either. Like, he had, when he first took over, he had some crap rosters. There's just no two ways about it. And, he had to be the manager during COVID and all these different things. And so he had a lot of the deck was stacked against him. I'm still a David Ross fan. I loved him when he was a player. I thought he did a decent job as a manager.
I think he's a good guy, solid manager.
Yeah, and I think that's fair.
But I don't think he's a great manager.
I think that's fair. Honestly, I think if he goes and maybe takes a bench coach job someplace, I heard the Yankees offered him a bench coaching job, and he turned it down because he wants to be a manager. I think that could have been a good move for him. Go be a bench coach for a couple of years, get another manager's job, and I think that's where he could potentially excel.
I just remember. Do you remember when I interviewed him a few years back when he was doing Dancing with the Stars over on the radio?
Oh, I do remember
on the radio
that.
Still,
I do. I just
remembered that I did. Because and I think it was one of those, the Dancing with the Stars publicists or whatever. It was one of those like we got 10 minutes with him, and my radio partner said, I don't know anything about Dancing with the Stars. Blah, 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 blah. You just pop culture. So, but we had fun with it. It was a lot of fun.
That's hilarious.
Because back then we were still like, as a family, especially when David Ross was on. I remember watching that season, and then that opportunity came up. So that was a lot of fun.
You got to take it.
He was a good guy. He had fun with it. So.
And that's the thing. I think he's a good guy. I think he's a genuine guy. I think what you see is what you get with David Ross, because I think he was the same when he was a player. I think he was the same when he was on TV doing like Sunday Night Baseball. And I think he was the same as a manager. So I think he is genuinely a good guy.
I concur. Well, that's going to do it for tonight. We've been at it for a while. We went even longer than I thought we were going to go tonight. But you told me when I sent you the outline, this has the potential to go for a while. And it absolutely did. So nothing wrong with that. All right. He's Vince. I'm Sean. We're going to wrap it up with that. Hope everybody enjoyed their time with us tonight. Hit the like button before you leave. I'm not sure what's going on tomorrow for a show yet. I guarantee we will be back Wednesday. My wife broke her ankle last week, so she has to have surgery on that. She's having some screws and stuff, put in her ankle.
That sounds
tomorrow.
horrible.
So I've got to, take her up there and, get her past the drugs and all that kind of stuff. Get her in the house when she gets home and, all that different kind of stuff.
You got to be the nurse for the nurse.
That's right. That's exactly right. So I'll be
see how much of a patient she is.
Yes. And based on the fact that she's been home the last week with a cast on it, not a very good patient. Sit down. Remember, you're home for a reason. Sit down. Yes.
Oh, gosh.
Appreciate it, Paul. Thank you very much. And I will pass that along. So we will talk to you. Vince and I will be back on Wednesday, and we will talk to you then on IB Nation Sports Talk.